Okay, today we're going to be doing Lord of the Flies, the end of chapter 4. Our aim is, what is the difference in the mood between the scene with Ralph and the scene with Jack? Remember, chapter 4 is a split scene, so there's going to be a different mood in Ralph's scene than there is in Jack's scene. There's Ralph's scene and there's Jack's scene. Ralph's scene so far has been calm and relaxing. They're swimming, they're relaxing like on vacation. Jack's scene already is much more wild. They're using face paint for hunting, and they're following Jack, which often leads to trouble. But in the middle of Ralph's scene, suddenly Ralph is up and jumping because he sees a ship out on the horizon, which is what he's been waiting for and hoping for all along. So when we're reading the scene, we want to think about what is the difference in mood between the scene with Ralph and the scene with Jack, but also as we read, what happens when these two different moods meet up in the next scene, when it's no longer a split scene. Now, before we read, we're going to encounter two vocabulary words. The first one is audible, and you can see the root word is aud, which means to hear, and the suffix is able or able, which is an adjective, which means the word means hearable, which is not really a word. Hearable, the word is audible. It means able to be heard. So something in this scene is going to be able to be heard. The next word is irrelevant. You see the word relevant in there. It means something that does not relate to the scene. So an irrelevant is a noun because it is a thing. It's the thing that is irrelevant. The irrelevance of Piggy is going to annoy Ralph, you're going to see. Okay, so follow along as I read in chapter 4 on page 67. Ralph sees a ship out on the ocean, and he is desperate for that ship to seize them. "You tell me," said Piggy anxiously. "Is there a signal? Do we have a signal that the ship can see us?" Ralph looked back at the dispersing smoke in the horizon, then up at the mountain. "Ralph, please, is there a signal?" Simon put out his hand timidly to touch Ralph, but Ralph started to run, splashing through the shallow end of the bathing pool, across the hot, white sands, under the palms. A moment later, he was battling with the complex undergrowth that was already engulfing the scar. Simon ran after him, then Maurice. Piggy shouted, "Ralph, please, Ralph!" Then he too started to run, stumbling over Maurice's discarded shorts before he was across the terrace. Behind the four boys, the smoke moved gently along the horizon, and on the beach, Henry and Johnny were throwing sand at Percival, who was crying quietly again, and all three were in complete ignorance of the excitement. By the time Ralph had reached the landward end of the scar, he was using precious breath to swear. He did desperate violence to his naked body among the rasping creepers so that blood was sliding over him. Just where the steep ascent of the mountain began, he stopped. Maurice was only a few yards behind him. "Piggy's specs!" shouted Ralph. "If the fire's all out, we'll need them." He stopped shouting and swayed in his feet. Piggy was only just visible, bumbling up from the beach. Ralph looked at the horizon, then up to the mountain. Was it better to fetch Piggy's glasses, or would the ship have gone? Or, if they climbed on, supposing the fire was all out, and they had to watch Piggy crawling nearer, and the ship sinking under the horizon. Balanced on a high peak of need, agonized by indecision, Ralph cried out, "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Simon, struggling with the bushes, caught his breath. His face was twisted. Ralph blundered on, savaging himself as the wisp of smoke moved on. The fire was dead. They saw that straight away. Saw what they had really known down on the beach when the smoke of home had beckoned. The fire was out, smokeless and dead. The watchers were gone. A pile of unused fuel lay ready. Ralph turned to the sea. The horizon stretched impersonal once more, barren of all but the faintest trace of smoke. Ralph ran stumbling along the rocks, saved himself on the edge of a pink cliff, and screamed at the ship, "Come back! Come back!" He ran backwards and forwards along the cliff, his face always to the sea. His voice rose insanely. "Come back! Come back!" Simon and Maurice arrived. Ralph looked at them with unwinking eyes. Simon turned away, smearing the water from his cheeks. Ralph reached inside himself for the worst word he knew. They'd let the bloody fire go out. He looked down the unfriendly side of the mountain. Piggy arrived, out of breath and whimpering like a little one. Ralph clenched his fist and went very red. The intentness of his gaze, the bitterness of his voice pointed for him. There they are. A procession had appeared, far down among the pink stones that lay near the water's edge. Some of the boys wore black caps, but otherwise they were almost naked. They lifted sticks in the air together whenever they came to an easy patch. They were chanting, something to do with the bundle that the errant twins carried so carefully. Ralph picked out Jack easily, even at that distance, tall, red-haired, and inevitably leading the procession. Simon looked now from Ralph to Jack, as he had looked from Ralph to the horizon, and what he saw seemed to make him afraid. Ralph said nothing more, but waited while the procession came nearer. The chant was audible, but at that distance, still wordless. Behind Jack walked the twins, carrying a great stake on their shoulders. The gutted carcass of a pig swung from the stake, swinging heavily as the twins toiled over the uneven ground. The pig's head hung down with gaping neck and seemed to search for something on the ground. At last the words of the chant floated up to them, across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes. "Kill the pig! Cut her throat! Spill her blood!" Yet, as the words became audible, the procession reached the steepest part of the mountain, and in a minute or two the chant had died away. Piggy sniveled, and Simon shushed him quickly, as though he had spoken too loudly in church. Jack, his face smeared with clays, reached the top first and hailed. Ralph excitedly with lifted spear. "Look! We've killed a pig! We stole up on them! We got in the circle!" Voices broke in from the hunters. "We got in the circle! We crept up! The pig squealed!" The twins stood with the pig swinging between them, dropping black gouts on the rock. They seemed to share one wide, ecstatic grin. Jack had too many things to tell Ralph at once. Instead, he danced a step or two, then remembered his dignity, and stood still, grinning. He noticed blood on his hands, and grimaced distastefully, looked for something on which to clean them, then wiped them on his shorts and laughed. Ralph spoke. "You let the fire go out." Jack checked, vaguely irritated by this irrelevance, but too happy to let it worry him. We can light the fire again." "You should have been with us, Ralph. We had a smashing time. The twins got knocked over. We hit the pig. I fell on top. I cut the pig's throat," said Jack proudly, and yet twitched as he said it. Can I borrow yours, Ralph, to make a nick in the hilt?" The boys chattered and danced. The twins continued to grin. "There was lashings of blood," said Jack, laughing and shuddering. "You should have seen it. We'll go hunting every day." Ralph spoke again, hoarsely. He had not moved. "You let the fire go out." This repetition made Jack uneasy. He looked at the twins and then back at Ralph. "We had to have them in the hunt," he said, "or there wouldn't have been enough for a ring." He flushed, conscious of a fault. "The fire's only been out for an hour or two. We can light it up again." He noticed Ralph's scarred nakedness and the somber silence of all four of them. He sought charitable in his happiness to include them in the thing that had happened. His mind was crowded with memories of the knowledge that had come to them when they closed in on the struggling pig, knowledge that they had outwitted a living thing, imposed their will upon it, taken away its life like a long, satisfying drink. He spread his arms wide. "You should have seen the blood!" The hunters were more silent now, but at this they buzzed again. Ralph flung back his hair. One arm pointed at the empty horizon. His voice was loud and savage and struck them into silence. "There was a ship!" Jack, faced at once with too many awful implications, ducked away from them. He laid a hand on the pig and drew his knife. Ralph brought his arm down, fist clenched, his voice shook. "There was a ship out there. You said you'd keep the fire going, and you let it out." He took a step toward Jack, who turned and faced him. "They might have seen us. We might have gone home." This was too bitter for Piggy, who forgot his timidity and the agony of his loss. He began to cry out shrilly. "You and your blood, Jack Merridew, you and your hunting. We might have gone home." Ralph pushed Piggy to one side. "I was chief, and you were going to do what I said. You talk. can't even build huts. Then you go off hunting and let the fire out." He turned away, silent for a moment. Then his voice came again, on peak of feeling. "There was a ship!" One of the smaller hunters began to wail. The dismal truth was filtering through to everybody. Jack went very red as he hacked and pulled at the pig. The job was too much. We needed everyone. Ralph turned. "You could have had everyone when the shelters were finished, but you had to hunt. We needed meat." Jack stood up as he said this, the bloodied knife in his hands. The two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant world of hunting, tactics, fierce exhilaration, skill, and there was the world of longing and baffled common sense. Jack transferred the knife to his left hand and smudged blood over his forehead as he pushed down the plastered hair. Piggy began again. "You didn't ought to have let that fire out. You said you'd keep the fire going." This from Piggy, and the wails of agreement from some of the hunters drove Jack to violence. The bolting look came into his blue eyes. He took a step, and able at last to hit someone, stuck his fist into Piggy's stomach. Piggy sat down with a grunt. Jack stood over him. His voice was vicious with humiliation. "You would you, fatty?" Ralph made a step forward, and Jack smacked Piggy's head. Piggy's glasses flew off and tinkled on the rocks. Piggy cried out in terror, "My specs!" He went crouching and feeling over the rocks, but Simon, who got there first, found them for him. Passions beat about Simon on the mountain top with awful wings. One side's broken. Piggy grabbed and put on the glasses. He looked malevolently at Jack. Okay, we're going to stop the scene there and think about what is the difference between the way Jack's group feels in this scene and the way Ralph's group feels when they meet up. Think about what Jack's group's been doing and what Ralph's group's been doing. And then, how does Jack respond when he finds out that they let the fire go out? You're going to answer these questions on the Google form, and remember to write your name.